attention.
The question we're asking today is, how did Title IX result in the University of Michigan promoting the women's rowing team to varsity status in 1996? Part of the reason why I chose this topic was because I was a varsity rower for the Michigan women's rowing team for 2 years, including being a Big Ten champion and a gold and silver medalist at the Big Ten championships. The other reason why I chose this topic was because my mom was a rower for Michigan before it was a varsity sport, and she was the inspiration for me to be on the team for 2 years. The story of Michigan women's rowing starts with the passage of Title IX 24 years prior in 1972. Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972 is just 37 words long. It reads, "No person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance." Let's look back on some of the pivotal moments in Title IX's history, including where the University of Michigan stands in their own Title IX compliance. In June of 1972, Title IX was enacted by Congress and signed into law. In July 1975, Congress approved Title IX regulations in athletics. High schools and colleges were given 3 years to comply. During this time, people had plenty to say in the press, and newspapers were constantly publishing updates on Title IX. This one from the Associated Press talks about the NCAA's main concern about the new regulations, the fact that it did not exempt revenue-producing sports such as football and basketball, and that the NCAA was considering a lawsuit. The NCAA ended up moving forward with this lawsuit in 1976 and challenged the legality of Title IX. It was dismissed 2 years later. In July of 1998, the Office for Civil Rights issued a Dear Colleague letter clarifying that a college or university's total athletic scholarship budget must mirror the institution's percentage of athletes of each gender within 1%. Again, during this time, Title IX was a controversial topic. The first article says, as more women can't be quote-unquote forced to come out and play, male athletes are unfairly being thrown off the athletic stage, and that Title IX provides a laugh, but it is failing to do its job, which is to provide equal opportunities for both sexes. The next article says that the Big Ten presidents would rather put on a good public relations act instead of supporting an effective gender equity act, and that a realistic attempt at equity would be for equal participation and funding among the non-revenue sports. Knowing the major historical moments in Title IX, let's now discuss how it was adopted at Michigan and the ups and downs. The first sex discrimination suit occurred in August of 1973, and it was at the University of Michigan. A group called the Committee to Bring About Equal Opportunity in Athletics for Women and Men, led by Marcia Fetterbush, filed the suit and complained that the most blatant inequities existed in the area of funding. Men's athletics at the University of Michigan received $2.6 million in 1 year, while women's athletics, which were all clubs, received $2,300. There was also discrimination in scholarships, facilities, and recruitment scholarship programs for women. This article is extremely Michigan-specific, Title IX bucking sexist barriers. It again includes Marcia Fetterbush and also two legendary Michigan athletics figures, Don Canham and Bo Schembechler. Fetterbush claims there is gross discrimination against women at Michigan, and that Canham and Schembechler were attempting to mislead the public about Title IX. Both Canham and Schembechler did tell newspapers that a strictly enforced Title IX would endanger or destroy their athletic program. Marcia Fetterbush thinks that women should be given the opportunity to participate in every single sport in which men have an opportunity, and that women deserve equal coaching salaries, equal equipment, and equal opportunity for travel and additional expenditures. She also predicts an athletic board which would develop a single philosophy for both men's and women's athletics. And she believes that Canham has asserted that he will fight rather than comply with Title IX, which proves disastrous for women in athletics. Also, the article mentions that the program most endangered by Title IX was the football program. This article from 1977 talks all about Phyllis Ocker and her involvement in the expansion of the women's athletic program at Michigan. It also details how since 1973, just 4 years later, the women's program had elevated 10 women's sports to varsity from the intramural level and included scholarships and the use of athletic department money and facilities. The article concludes saying it may take some time, but the women's athletic program is definitely on the upswing, and Phyllis Ocker will have a major part in its continued growth. This new timeline is going to track some of the different developments within women's athletics in the Big Ten and the NCAA. So in August of 1981, 9 Big Ten universities voted to affiliate their women's athletic programs with the conference. Soon after, formats for 9 women's sport championships were finalized. This is the oldest and only picture that comes up in the Michigan Daily Digital Archives when you search Women's Club Rowing. I'm excited to introduce our documentary expert, Pam Lucken, at the time, Pam Carroll, who's going to jump right in and talk about Title IX and Michigan women's rowing.
I was well placed to watch this unfurl because as the athletic department was considering which sport to elevate to varsity status to comply with Title IX, they were looking at a few club sports that were pretty highly committed at the time. Women's hockey was one of them, and women's rowing was another. Those are the 2 that I knew about. It's interesting timing because as they were interviewing and looking at these 2 sort of large roster teams that would provide a large number of female student athletes to the athletic departments, we had a great season. So we won a gigantic race, won a scholarship to go race at maybe the 2nd annual Women's Henley in Henley, England. And then we won a bid to the national championships, which was crazy. So we did very well. And I think what that did was solidified that it was a serious program and that we had the athletes already who would be there for the numbers first year, and a history of, with our novice program, we were teaching first year rowers, just the numbers was a good thing. Also, it didn't hurt that at the same time, athletic departments around the country were doing the same thing. So Ohio State did it the same year. Virginia did it the same year. A lot of the big schools that we race against now also elevated. Michigan State also did it. It was an interesting time because the club sport of rowing, called crew, at the time, we were a pretty dedicated bunch. We paid to perform. We did so many fundraisers, rent-a-rowers, letter writing campaigns, and our goal at the time was just to elevate our game. Yeah, completely self-funded. And a joint effort between the women and the men. It was our goal to find as many athletes as we could every fall on campus that would be dues-paying members, and have enough coaches, paid and volunteer, to coach all of these athletes. So we were back at Dadvale, which our team hadn't been at for all of these years. So it comes down, and Dadvale is a race that has heats, semis, reps, finals, and this is our last race of our whole entire career, and we were so into it. So we made it through everything. We were in the finals, and we had this neck and neck race. This is on the Schuylkill in Philadelphia. So there are these old historic boathouses like Boathouse Row that have been there for hundreds of years. Temple University, is part of this race and has had a rowing team for hundreds of years. These kids who want to row, who are rowing in Philadelphia, have been doing it since they were young, right? And here we are from like the Midwest on a little river where we had to turn every 2,000 meters, row, turn, like, and they're on this long, historic, beautiful river. And so it's the finals, and we're under this bridge in this crazy turn, and all of a sudden we're like ahead of Temple, and like nobody could believe it. Like we could not believe it. And it's coming down to the end, and we're like pulling for everything that we have, because like we loved each other and we love this sport. And this crazy thing, like under the bridge where they weren't sure if like the coxswain cut off Temple a little, but we were so far ahead. And so we crossed the line and we're ahead, but I was like, we don't know if we won. We don't know if we won. And like, because of the crazy thing that happened under the bridge. And then when it ended up that we won, it was like so crazy, so historic. So and also Dad Vale is a crazy historical race that's been going on for many, many years. And they always send a men's crew and a women's crew, or had a scholarship to send them to Henley. And so we were so crazily happy to get this gold medal at this race. And at that time, you exchange shirts with all of the boats that you won. So we like won so many shirts, like shirts from Texas that we wore forever, shirts from everywhere, right? From all the crews that you beat. But winning that medal was huge. But then we heard about the scholarship. And in other years, they bring like a double, so 2 rowers, from one team, or a single, like they'll sponsor a single to go race at Henley, or something like that. And so we were thinking there's no way that they are gonna choose an 8 to go to Henley. And then they chose the women's 8 from Michigan to sponsor, to go to Henley. And we were like, we could not even believe it. And then the bid to nationals, like the national championships, like we were rowing against colleges that have had rowing for years, like 50 years. Like Wisconsin has had rowing for a million years. Princeton, Brown, all of these historic Ivy League schools were there at the national championship. And little Michigan, who fundraised for their unisuits and took a bus 24 hours to their training trip in Florida, we would like try to like cobble together bagels from the cafeteria for our lunches on these races. So it was so crazy that after that this little club team made it there. I think just having like these gritty people who had slept on church floors like their whole time, and who had watched some success come from this. Like they were working other jobs. We were sleeping in church floors. We were sleeping in gyms. We were driving ourselves to everything. We were fundraising, paying for a whole way. We didn't have any help with school. I think having all those gritty people is what made Michigan strong out of the gate. Class of 1995, we just were super dedicated, men and women across the board. We had boats full of seniors, and really went into the leadership of it to try to grow our team, grow our alumni. And those 2 coaches, the men and the women, are still at Michigan, and those 2 dreams have happened. I think that Michigan had a really developed hockey program in the 90s, and a beautiful, an awesome facility. And so when you're thinking about elevating any sport, you need to think about what equipment they're going to need. So for rowing, you need these expensive boats, right? For hockey, you need an ice arena. What I heard was that the coach at the time was not at all interested in sharing the hockey arena. So I have a feeling that that was a really big reason why women's hockey wasn't selected. And I know that our coach said, we don't need anything. We just give us some boats. Give us some boats and we can make it work. Because that's how we had been to begin with. That first year, no coaches in launch. The second year, no boathouse at all, just boats on a hill and Belleville Lake, like tripping down this hill in the ice. Like
Michigan's first varsity roster was for the 1996-97 year. It featured 24 athletes, 15 of which were from Michigan.
It was a time period when rowing just became a varsity sport, where we did feel like the embarrassing stepchild, where you walked into these meetings and with all of the coaches, and it's almost like we didn't feel like we belonged there, and soccer was sort of the same way at the time. They were brand new as well. It was a time. In general, we were a little angry that we were working so hard for this sport, and there was like so much pomp and circumstance for so many men's sports at the time. So I feel like we did have a chip on our shoulder about that. As I recall, so many programs were picking rowing as the Title IX sport. Like, it just made sense in terms of the numbers. It went almost across the Big Ten. People did that. So I don't know if it was so much like you must pick rowing. I think they were all picking rowing, but I think the success at the beginning might have had something to do with that interesting kind of Cinderella, Danville, Henley, NCAA story.
In April of 2000, the first Big Ten Conference Women's Rowing Championship was held, and the University of Michigan claimed the inaugural championship. And also the Big Ten recognized championships for 25 sports in this year, 12 of which were women's. As of 2021, the NCAA sponsors 21 women's sports, in which over 219,000 women compete on over 10,000 teams across all three divisions. Division I women's rowing had 88 teams and 4,609 athletes during that year. At the end of the day, the elevation of Michigan women's rowing to varsity status in 1996 had much to do with Title IX and the regulations being enforced at Michigan, but it also had a lot to do with the success of the club team prior to varsity status and the class of 1995's dedication. Michigan Rowing's most recent roster for the 2022-23 year features 60 athletes, 29 of which are from Michigan, and 11 are international student athletes. Michigan's South Performance Center, finished in 2017, includes, among other sports, the rowing suite, which has multiple rooms for rowing activities, including the state-of-the-art indoor tank. Michigan Boathouse resides on Belleville Lake and was constructed in 1999. To close out this documentary, let's take a look at Michigan's current compliance with Title IX. As a reminder, Title IX requires all educational institutions in the U.S. to prevent discrimination in sports facilities, training centers, equipment, and other support, and provide an annual equity and athletics data analysis report, which tracks participation, coaching staff and salaries, revenues, and expenses. Male and female athletes also need to be rewarded equally, and the ratio of men and women's participation opportunities must be proportionate to the total number of students in an institution. At the University of Michigan, there is a large disparity between the annual compensation made by head coaches and assistant coaches for men's and women's teams. The average annual institutional salary for men's head coaches is over $1 million, while the average annual institutional salary for women's coaches is about $340,000. We see a similar pattern with assistant coach compensation. We see a similar pattern with athletically related student aid. Men's teams get about $15.8 million in student aid, while women's teams get about $11.9 million. And recruiting expenses for men's teams is $3.4 million, while women's teams have about $700,000 dedicated to recruiting expenses. The ratio of men undergraduates and women undergraduates is 48% to 52%, while the ratio of men athletes to women athletes is 53% to 47%. While not a huge disparity, this is out of compliance with Title IX. We can also see the figures for scholarships and salaries shows that the University of Michigan is out of compliance with Title IX in a few ways. This information was provided by the 2021 Equity and Athletics Data Analysis Report from the University of Michigan. A big thanks to the Michigan Daily Digital Archives, which provided the majority of the articles seen in this documentary. To look further into any part of this topic, you can go and search through these references that helped me make this documentary.